Welcome to That Can't Be Right, a podcast about exploring structural wrongs, cultural oddities, and wild opinions, sometimes all three in one episode. I'm your host, Rhian Rogan, and before we jump into the really good stuff, I'll share some highlights about me and why I was inspired to start this podcast in the first place. I explained a bit in the trailer, but I don't think people actually listen to podcast trailers, so here we go. I'm a young Black millennial woman born and raised in Houston, Texas. I have a degree from the University of Pittsburgh and another from UCLA. I know what a dial-up connection sounds like, and I've also been very annoyed when the internet on a plane was too slow for me to stream a Beyonce album. The average student loan debt burden has tripled since I was potty trained, and I've seen the success and failure of multiple women's professional sports leagues. I don't understand why we charge kids to eat lunch at schools they're forced to attend, but don't charge them to ride the bus. And hey, consultants, don't start telling school districts to charge kids to ride the bus. Companies are still offering unpaid internships. America has been at war in Afghanistan for nearly 2/3 of my life, but I'd wager a large majority of the US population couldn't find Kabul on a map. Beyonce has never won Album of the Year at the Grammys. Home ownership is a pipe dream for many in my generation. It was easier for me to purchase a handgun in Texas than it was to register a vehicle I bought in California. It's April 2021. Super rich people got way more super richer in the last year, while lines at food banks got way longer. Meanwhile, the US has a sub-minimum wage. College endowments are huge but untouchable, and I've seen videos of Black men and women murdered by the police, sometimes captured by the police officer's own camera. And every time I think to myself, that can't be right. How do we fix it? So I'm doing the research and asking the experts. I hope you'll join me. Follow or subscribe in the app you're using to listen to my voice. Check me out on Twitter and Instagram at TCBRPod. Let's jump into it. It is no secret to my friends and family that I'm a huge Beyonce fan. I've seen her in concert many times. I try to buy something on every Ivory Park drop, whether or not my bank account agrees that's a good idea. And my default playlist when I get in the car is Beyonce. I also watch award shows when she's nominated and or performing to make sure she gets the respect she deserves. And frequently, like many Black artists, she does not get that respect. I am firmly in the camp that Beyonce and Lemonade absolutely deserve to win Album of the Year at the Grammys. And I'm trying to understand why they didn't. Hint, I actually know why they didn't, but I've asked someone smarter than me to explain, so here comes John. Dr. John Vilanova is a scholar of the cultural and creative industries who focuses on structural and institutional inequality in the music industry. He is a professor of practice in journalism and communication and Africana Studies at Lehigh University. Also a new dad, so please, we beg your forgiveness if there's any missteps or anything like that. John, welcome to That Can't Be Right.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me. Before anything, I just want to push against the idea that anybody is smarter than anybody here. I'm sure that there's a lot of things about all of this that you can add that I can't. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you today about all this.
Awesome. Well, first, before we talk about my favorite subject, Beyonce, how did you come into a career studying this, doing research on this?
Certainly. So I've been writing about music for, I guess we'll call it about 15 years. I was an intern at Rolling Stone magazine during my college career. And also, I guess one of the things that's really kind of striking in all of this, I always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to write about music, and I always, wanted to write about power. If you do any sort of thinking and learning about the history of the popular music industry, inevitably you come to the work of Black artists. There is no popular music, particularly American popular music specifically, that was possible without the work of Black people, without the creative output of Black people, Black artists, Black communities. And so any history of popular music, any thinking about popular music needs to be attuned to those legacies and to what that means to be following them. Because inevitably we get to a place where when we look at payment, when we look at, citation, when we look at anything, theft of intellectual property and things like that, inevitably it always kind of ties back in these types of ways. And so for me, actually, a lot of all of this came together during a different award show, during a different time, which was the MTV Video Music Awards in 2009. Kanye West interrupts Taylor Swift's acceptance speech. She's about to give a speech because she has triumphed in the Best Female Video category. Again, very relevant to our conversation today. She won for her song "You Belong with Me." She beat out Beyonce's "Single Ladies." Which at the time, I think I was a senior in college. Single Ladies was omnipresent, right?
Yeah.
It was very clearly a defining cultural moment. And I think that was one of the things I like to joke about is that I believe that Kanye West may be the only person who cares about award shows as much as I do. And in that moment, what he was really, what it felt like he was speaking to was that, there was some sense of injustice here. And at the time, and ever since, obviously there have been some disappointing steps along his career path. But one of the things that he has always, been unapologetic about is that artistry matters to him, that he thinks about his own career and the careers of his peers within this longer continuum and also across different, styles of art when we think about his work in fashion and things like that. And so in this moment, what he was really disappointed about, frustrated about, shocked about was that, an artist had been denied their creative due. And so that, when we think about that interruption and just like one more kind of, minor note in that saga that I think everybody kind of forgets is that award was for Best Female Video. At the end of the ceremony, Beyonce wins for Best Video. And she winds up ceding the stage. She allows Taylor Swift to come onto the stage to deliver the acceptance speech that, she wanted to give initially. But there's a kind of, obvious question here, which is if Beyonce Knowles' video was the best video, why then was it not also the best female video? And so that really kind of got me sort of thinking about femininity, Black femininity in relationship to white femininity and what it meant. So it felt like this kind of silly award show disconnect, but it really was, for me, kind of striking. I remember sitting and watching this happen. At the same time, this was 2009. Twitter was, I believe, like a year and a half old at this point.
Yeah.
And I started to see things popping up on Twitter that were concerning in the wake of all of this. And, at one point I was able to get access to Twitter analytics to confirm this. And what it really was an incredible number of instances of, harassment of Kanye West, speaking about how he should be lynched, comparing him to a monkey, these types of horrifying tropes that we know persist along this kind of history, the way that we're talking about a history of music and its relationship to blackness. In the same time, we can think about gender and the ways that it has a relationship to blackness as well. So you have a black man in an interaction with a white woman, and Twitter in this way stepped up immediately to try and defend Taylor Swift's virtue or her honor. And it was horrifying. It was terrifying. And it was really, really striking for me because it was this many people care about award shows this much. And if you remember, I think a week later, President Obama spoke out and he said that he believed Kanye West had been a jerk when he had done this. Which, I mean, there's an argument to be made there. There's also an argument to be made about making good trouble, as it were.
Yeah.
But so really, this kind of got me thinking about that people care about these things a lot, and that what Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage. And so the idea that we have this stage where millions and millions of people are watching these shows, and that when this happens, we're watching historical racial traumas be acted out. And so in this case, there's a chapter in Angela Davis's Women, Race, and Class that's called Rape, Racism, and the Myth of the Black Rapist, that really kind of talked about the ways that black masculinity was played up as a way of justifying lynching, as a way of justifying violence. And so it was like, this seems like a tiny thing, like an award show that everyone says doesn't matter. In this case, in particular, the VMAs, which is a fan voted award or whatever.
Right.
But that what we were seeing here was that millions of people were watching this. People were having very, very strong feelings about this, and that it was a stage in which these types of dramas were playing out. And so, that's a very roundabout way of getting to my own history with this, which is that, years later, I had just taken a new job editing musicology, musiqology, which is the public scholarship of my mentor, Guthrie Ramsey, at the University of Pennsylvania. I had just taken a job as the managing editor, editing that blog. At the time, we were posting once or twice a week pieces on African-American music. I guess this is basically almost 10 years later, a little less than that, maybe 8 years later or so. And I'm about to write my second piece for the site, and the Grammys are on. And I'm saying, oh, okay, I want to watch this. And so, again, we kind of get at a similar experience where, in this case, for me, I was the one who wanted to burst onto the stage, because the idea that Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, when we think about the last award that they give out at the Grammys, it's Album of the Year. We could talk about this later on, but many of the categories in the Grammys, they list they name things as, best solo pop performance.
Yep.
In this case, it was Album of the Year. And I think that for me and for an incredible number of people, no sounds soundtracked the year more appropriately than did the work of Kendrick Lamar, right? So we're talking at this point, it's a year and a half after Michael Brown's murder, and Black Lives Matter begins to be a rallying cry for many people. That's the defining story of America in 2016. And so to have the Grammys not represent that was kind of shocking for me. So ultimately, Kendrick Lamar loses out to Taylor Swift, I believe. And so then I was looking at this and I said, oh, that's kind of surprising that, this pretty clearly and obviously was was this situation where a work that I felt was superior by a black artist, and also more indicative of what the Grammys said to be awarding, seemed to be, missed out on. What happened the previous year? The previous year, one of the things we'll probably talk about, Beyonce loses out to Beck. Looking back the year before that, year before that, year before that. And I started to see this pattern. At the same time, there's lots and lots of media suggesting that Kendrick Lamar was the night's, quote, big winner.
Yep.
When you looked at it, all of his wins, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that he got one win for appearing as a guest in Taylor Swift's Bad Blood music video.
Correct.
So that was a non-racially marked category. All of his other wins were in categories where he was, likely, not exclusively, but likely only in competition with other black artists. Mm-hmm. And whenever his work was judged alongside the work of white artists, it was said to be not as good. It was, that to be the big winner as a black artist at the Grammys meant that, you got to be considered among the best, but that you would always, be told that you were not good enough. At the time, I think I called it the structural limits on black excellence. So again, I've sort of traced a trajectory here. We're saying that black music is foundational and central to popular music, to American popular music, to the global popular music industry. A year later, hip-hop would become the highest grossing genre of all genres of music in the world. And yet, in this moment, you'd have black artists performing, you'd have black artists presenting, black artists involved in every aspect of the Grammy Awards. But they were told, and at that point, and we are still now, we are in a 12-year period in which a black artist has not won Album of the Year. Mm-hmm. And some streaks have been broken, but recently, there are lengthy periods in the major Grammy categories when black artists have been nominated dozens of times and never won them. Kanye West, for instance, I don't believe that he has ever won a Grammy Award in which the category is not coded in a way that suggests it's a category for music made by black people.
Yeah.
And so, so basically, started thinking about this, wrote this piece about Kendrick Lamar, because what I felt was, I wrote a line in there that people get confused about what structural racism is, which is a term that, academics like to throw out. And so in this case, I felt that this was a very clear example of what that was, where you had an industry that had figured out how to have black people be part of it, but not to allow them or acknowledge the centrality that they and their work actually had in the music industry.
No, that's...
And so, so I'll just say, and things kind of went on from there, that piece was really successful. And then obviously I think we'll be talking about the following year, which is, what brings us here together, I think, regarding the Recording Academy's rejection of Lemonade as its album of the year. And so, I said, let's do this. Let's really kind of explore this. And so I'm in the process of, writing a book about the Grammy Awards that basically looks at every 10-year period and identifies key themes, trends, topics. What happens when a black artist wins and why? What happens when they're not? What are the patterns? How are they reflective of larger sentiments in the culture and in the industry? So that basically, we can take this award show and again say that what this actually is a mirror. It's a mirror on, cultural sentiments. It's a mirror on power. It's a mirror on equality. It's a mirror on the progress or lack thereof that our nation and that the world is making with regard to racial equity and equality.
For sure. So thank you so much for that context. I initially reached out to you because I was very angry on behalf of my very good friend Beyonce, who definitely knows that I exist and has never won Album of the Year, as you've stated. Despite releasing some groundbreaking, culture-shifting, as Twitter loves to say, albums. And I remembered the excellent op-ed you wrote about the glass ceiling at Black art. So before we look at Beyonce specifically, before we look at her wins and losses at the Grammys, what are the Grammys? Just to clear up confusion about Grammys versus Oscars versus Tonys versus Emmys. And who are these people voting to deny my friend her due?
Certainly, yeah. So I'll give some history on this. It's the late 1950s, and Hollywood seems to have a little bit of a PR problem that they can't. They're trying to figure out. Okay, we have all these studios, but we don't have tourism. We don't have any sort of way of marking the impact of film here. What should we do? And so they form a Hollywood beautification committee, and they come up with the idea that will later become the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And so they're having these meetings at a restaurant called the Brown Derby in downtown Los Angeles, and they say, hey, maybe there should be some musicians in this Walk of Fame. Maybe we should reach out to some label presidents, get them together. They can figure out which musicians should be on the Walk of Fame. And those label heads were just like, maybe it'll just be whoever the popular artists are. Go by that. And then they got to look at who was at the top of the charts and what was at the top of the charts, and they said, oh no, this won't do.
What was at the top of the charts? Was it black people or rock?
It was rock and roll.
Okay.
Right, which again, at the time, everyone understood rock and roll to be, there were op-eds being written in these psychological studies suggesting that rock and roll was poisoning the minds of youth of America and turning them into sex slaves and all things like that. And again, all of those ideas are tied to the ways that race works, because rock and roll was, very, very clearly a black originated genre and form of music. And so they have these meetings, they get together and they, produce a list of artists like Frank Sinatra, who they believe are more representative of what the music industry should be holding up. And after having done this for the Walk of Fame, they said, hey, maybe there's something here. Maybe the music industry has a little bit of a PR problem if the artists who are actually great are not the ones who are, at the top of the charts. Maybe we need to, I think that there's one quote that I referenced in some of my writing somewhere that says that, they wanted to save the music industry. And so they formed the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, which functions very similarly to the Film Academy that awards the Oscars. It's very similar. That's an older organization. And so the plan for NARAS, as it was called, now it's just called the Recording Academy. But the plan was that they were going to hold an award show, and that what they would do with that award show would be to recognize the truly great artists. And so the way that it worked then and the way that it still works now is that the only people, this is really worth it and important to get an understanding of. You have to be a member to be able to participate in the voting. What membership requires is demonstration of your expertise. So you have to, I think the number for a long time, it was 6. You had to have credits on 6 nationally distributed music releases. And this could be as assistant producer. It could be as bass player. You just had to have these credits. It could be as album liner notes writer, because for a long time, and the only Grammy that I ever have a chance of winning one day would be liner notes, which is the little books that they used to put in the CDs when that would be how things would hand it out. They still hand out the liner notes Grammy, and so if anybody listening to this wants me to write some liner notes for your records so that I can get to become a member of the Academy, that would be great.
Yes.
And you also have to pay a fee. It's not a very, very large amount of money, but I think at the time, I think now it's probably a couple of $100s, which again is not massive. But in the same time, I never want to say that if there's a fee structure like that in place, who does that foreclose?
Right.
People who might not have the money to be able to do that, people who might not have the sort of wherewithal to be working in the music industry and have an understanding that this is something that they could participate in. And so they create this, body of voters who are said to be experts. And a key concept, they put together a Grammy credo in their 3rd year, which says that, the Grammys will not reward sales, they will reward excellence. That was their key word and their key concept. And in the beginning of the book, I unpack that term and the way that it started to be used as a way of creating differentiation in a post Brown versus Board United States, right? So Brown versus Board says separate is inherently unequal. And so they said, well, maybe difference doesn't happen as a result of segregation. It happens as a result of the fact that there are some people who are just more excellent than others. And that was the argument that was happening over and over and over again for artistic excellence. And so moving all the way to today, so I guess one more thing I'll say is that there are a number of categories. The main categories that I spend time studying, because they're the place where these conflicts happen, is what's known as the general field of the Grammy Awards. So that's Album of the Year, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, and Best New Artist. People get confused about record and song. Song is the composition. It's the writing of the song. And record is the recording itself. And so over time, the categories, I believe, there was a few dozen at the beginning. It's gotten as high as in the, like 110 or something like that, and then gone downward and upward and fluctuated over time. And so, they've been going on. They just celebrated their 60th anniversary a couple of years ago. I think we're at 62 years now. And ultimately, they weren't aired on television in their first few years, but eventually they became, pretty significant media moment. It's among the most watched broadcasts every year. So people like to talk about, how the Grammys are having record low viewership right now. An incredible number of things are having record low viewership right now because of cable, cord cutting and things like that. That people don't really consume media on cable anymore. And so I'll just say that the Grammys are still a pretty significant, based on the amount of people who watch them and also the amount of discourse that gets produced following them. And so, ultimately, like I said, these main categories, Album of the Year, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, those and Best New Artist to a certain extent, those are the categories where I think we can really, really dial in and get an understanding of the work that might be happening here. I'll just say one more thing, which is that there's lots of work in academia and other places about canons, right? You might have heard about the literary canon, which is, that these are the books that every high school student should have read before they get to a point. And Toni Morrison, in particular, has produced some really excellent scholarship about the tying of canon formation to power and to whiteness. And so that ultimately, when we have these, and when I say canon, I mean CANON, right? For folks who are not familiar with this concept. And so one of the things that is worth kind of thinking about is that the Grammys are a collective memory project, that the Grammys are essentially saying, this is the music that is most important. This is the music that is most indicative and most representative of the music industry at any time. And so, they believe themselves to be engaging in this important project. It's not simply giving awards to people. It's about creating a memory and a history of what the music industry is. And there is a museum, there's a Grammy museum in Los Angeles right outside the Staples Center. If you go and check it out, it really is about the idea that they are the stewards. They are the folks who are really focused on curating what needs to be, what deserves to be remembered.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important part of the conversation. And we'll talk about this later about like why should we care, if we care, what matters, and it contributes to the history and how we remember things. So let's talk about Beyonce again. I keep bringing it back because people might say I'm talking about Beyonce getting snubbed in those general fields that you mentioned, but people might say Beyonce is the most awarded, most nominated female in Grammy history. 79 nominations, 28 awards. But 22 have come in those racialized categories. 22 of those wins, and to be specific, have come in those racialized categories. Going back to what you were mentioning before, like, why do you think that's significant in how the Grammys are awarding and recognizing art?
So with regard to Beyonce, I think it's, pretty clear to say that, she is, if not the one of the, and I would certainly say the defining artist of the 21st century. When we think about the narratives that she's creating with her work, the ways that she's thinking about herself as a multimodal, multimedia artist. We can have a separate talk at some point because I believe that Homecoming, her Coachella documentary, should have won the Oscar for Best Picture in the year in which it was released. But that's
Don't get any arguments here.
I think that's perhaps a discussion for a different time. But so what it really comes down to is that Beyonce is kind of just the latest in a set of Black artists who win Grammy Awards, but not either not at the time that they would make sense for them to, and that again their work when compared to white artists is told that they are second best. So here's some examples. Kanye West, for instance, he at the time that I had written this, which I think was a couple of years ago, he had won 21 Grammy Awards. None had come outside of raced categories. He has been nominated 17 times in categories that are, said to be general, that are not coded as Black, and he has lost all 17 times that he's been nominated. So all 17 times. So again, there are obviously white artists who, make hip hop and sometimes get nominated in those types of categories. There's pretty significant controversy around Macklemore's victory.
Yep.
But so generally speaking, those categories are coded Black. Aretha Franklin, right? Kind of seminal, foundational artist in American popular music history. She's been nominated 31 times for Grammy Awards, none of which had come in album, song, or record of the year. So Aretha Franklin's work was never deemed even worthy of making the shortlist to be in competition with white artists. And as far as Beyonce goes, I updated this after this most recent award season. 48% of the time she is nominated in Black categories, she wins. So half the time. When she's in competition with white artists, she wins only 1/4 of the time. And when she has been nominated in Album of the Year, Record of the Year, and Song of the Year, she has been nominated 15 times. And she has won 1 time, which was for Song of the Year in 2010 for Single Ladies. Yep. And so again, what we have here is a pretty clear and obvious example of an artist who is being told that their artistry is, worth being in consideration with, but ultimately falls short of being deemed truly excellent, that she loses out again and again and again to white artists who the music industry recognizes as creating work that is superior. At least that's their take on things, which obviously seems kind of silly and strange to people like us.
Absolutely. So there's 2 things that come to mind as you run down those kind of those statistics. One, like, I don't know what will happen in the future, but I feel like the Grammys are setting Beyonce up to win a Lifetime Achievement Award that, is cool and heartwarming, but it's like you should have just given her flowers when she was releasing the best music. Because to hear that Aretha Franklin never reached the pinnacle of the general field, and considering her role in musical history, that's insane. Two.
I've got. Oh, here. Let me
go
respond
ahead.
to that one really, really quickly. Here's
Yeah.
a list for you: Jimi Hendrix, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, The Four Tops, Gil Scott-Heron, George Clinton, and Parliament Funkadelic, the Staple Singers, Sam Cooke. I'm just giving you, I don't know how many, what that was, 6 or 7 names of artists that we don't have popular music without. All of them received their first Grammy Award for Lifetime Achievement.
Unacceptable. It's like it is great that the Grammys are acknowledging their achievement, but it feels like a consolation prize for
yes.
ignoring you again when you're producing top quality, amazing art in the moment.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that's also kind of worth noting about all of this is, what's the purpose of these smaller categories? It is, at least in part, I'm not a conspiracy theorist here. I think that it's, and especially given all the talk that's been happening lately about this, I think that we might have reason to start questioning the process with all of this. But one of the things that is worth noting is that if you have a Grammy Awards without Black artists at it, you miss significant amounts of the population, considering the popularity of the music and things like that. And so it begs the question, do these categories and do these nominations for artists like Beyonce, are they strategic in that they persuade Black artists to attend? During the first Grammy Awards, actually, Frank Sinatra lost in a number of categories that he was nominated for, and he was very angry about this. And so he said for the second year, I'm definitely not going to come. And so they let him know in secret. They said, by the way, you're going to be winning this year. Because one of the things that we're seeing is that we're seeing Black artists pushing against this, saying we don't need this anymore.
Yep.
Artists do receive a pretty significant bump in album sales and digital downloads and streams after performances. Wins don't really matter that much in terms of turning a profit for the artist as a result of these things. But artists are starting to realize that this structure is set up to incentivize getting them there so that they can be shown on the telecast, so that these types of controversies and conversations can happen. But they're, saying, what is it? Why is it that you continue to hold us at arm's length in this type of way and deny us our rightful place at the center of the music industry? So there's a lot of layers to all this. And I think ultimately, I'd like, I don't even know if what feels surprising and what doesn't anymore about what the Grammy Awards wind up doing. So what will it take? This longstanding question that I think I've been working on trying to get an answer to. What would it take for a Black artist to win Album of the Year? Which is something that we can talk about in a little bit, I would guess. Yeah,
absolutely. We will definitely get there. So first, I have another question, and then I want to get back to the second question, which I hope I'll remember. Are the Grammys similar to the Super Bowl in that the artists are paying for the production of the performance themselves?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't believe so.
Okay.
I do not know. I would love to know, but I don't think that that's the case.
Okay. Cool. And then the second question or second response to what you're saying about who is winning and how they're perceiving the art is in some of the articles of yours that I read, it mentions, or you talk about how people defend Beck, how people defend Adele, what people say about the art worthiness of these Black albums. For Beck, it was when Beck won, people defended her lyrics, or people criticized Beyonce's lyrics. They criticized the size of her production team. They criticized how many people were getting credits. And then when she lost for Lemonade, people said it was great, but not his music, not the musicianship. That feels like very coded, very significant, but still racist.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. So you've hit on a lot of the major points that, in the wake of the Beyonce Beck controversy, there was a BuzzFeed article in particular that circulated very widely that quoted Beck's lyrics alongside Beyonce's lyrics as a way of saying that he was so basically what this comes down to is what are the tools that we use to assess great art? And that ultimately may be the problem here. I think that this question that you're asking might get at a lot of this, that for Grammy voters, they have a set of criteria that they deploy, and that set of criteria might rely on racist assumptions about things. So, for instance, if there was a narrative about an artist, they made a beat on a laptop in 5 minutes. Old Town Road is a kind of interesting example of this, right? So again, nominated for lots of major general field awards, didn't win them. Was one of the things that may have contributed to this a perception or a belief that music was somehow easier to make and or somehow less musical, right? This is an old standing controversy as it relates to hip hop in particular, right? That people like to argue that hip hop is not music, that artists aren't singing, things like that. That maybe what actually is the problem is a too small definition or a too small understanding of what music is, and by that same token, by what artistry is. And that smallness in particular is a way of legitimizing, defending, supporting, and arguing for the artistry of white musicians and not of black musicians. I think a really period, full stop. I'll give this to you because I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about things. In an earlier part of my career, I wrote about Top Chef, the food competition show and I wrote about it for Entertainment Weekly. And one of the things that's very, very interesting when you watch old seasons of Top Chef is that the taste of the judges, like their literal palates, have a sensibility about them, right? They're defined by French cooking. They're defined what we would call haute cuisine. And so that over time, you would find artists who made what they would call soul food, artists that made food that did not look a certain vision of what sophistication was, that those types of cooks would not succeed in the competition. And so now what's very interesting, we're recording this in April. Last night, there was an episode of Top Chef in which all of the cooks were, they went to different Afro-diasporic restaurants around the city where they're hosting the show, ate the food, and then were asked to recreate it. And so, you could tell that the ways that the judges were approaching this, that they've been working themselves, and I applaud them for having done so, to think about their palates, to think about their idea about what good food is, and that they needed a kind of reset there, that they had been centralizing, valorizing, and suggesting that what was the best food was of a certain world. When in reality, this is all a very strange and complex thing in the first place. Why do we set art in competition with each other for these types of awards? And I think, again, that goes back to what I was saying about the idea that it's what art is worth being remembered, what art is important. And you kind of hinted at, you said this. I want to cite Ann Powers for this, the estimable NPR critic and writer who inspires my work all the time. She said in response to the piece that I wrote in the Los Angeles Times about Beyonce and Adele that she had spoken to people in the industry, and you cited this. They said that Beyonce's they think of Beyonce as a quote performer, but they think of Adele as a quote artist. And one thing I do kind of want to, zoom out a little bit here. I want to say this respectfully and very carefully, which is that when we look at the history of the ways that stories have been told about blackness and about black people, we can, and again, I don't use this cavalierly. This is serious. Some of the exercise that slaves were invited to do while they were on the ship was to dance. Right, that there has, in the ways that these narratives around race have been made for centuries, there has been this idea that music somehow and rhythm, right, somehow springs organically and easily from black communities, the black church, black doo-wop groups singing on a street corner or in a bathroom, which was something that would happen in high schools in the 50s and things like that. That there is something every day about music for black people. This is what is communicated. I'm not saying this, but I'm saying that this is a racist presumption that has happened. And what I would suggest is that what this history has done is that it predisposes people, music industry people and everyday people, to think that music somehow comes more easily to black people. And that, so when there's a really excellent chapter in a book written by Jack Hamilton. It's called Just Around Midnight, talking about the ways that discourse around Bob Dylan was created versus discourse around Sam Cooke was created. Right? That one person was this wandering troubadour, a political artist. That was Bob Dylan. Sam Cooke, again, that there was somehow something less artistic about that. So again, I think that this is, we're talking about award shows. They are, like I said, mirrors on society, but I never want to overstate this. But I do think it's really, really important, again, that when we get a long view of this history, we start to see the ways that our present might be a product of really horrifying pasts and racist pasts.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And zooming back in on Beyonce, and then we'll zoom back out to that history before we wrap up. I don't think Beyonce could have a career like Adele, where you just go out and stand there and sing, because of what you've just explained, that there's this idea that black art, black artistry comes naturally, and she should be doing those things, of course, and you don't have those expectations maybe of white artists. And you took it back to Sam Cooke and Bob Dylan. So absolutely, there is very weird expectations and rooted in racism, which is an underlying hypothesis of the show, that everything that can't be right has roots in racism and misogyny, sometimes both.
Often, yeah.
Yeah.
If not always.
Oh, yeah. So we talked briefly about Kendrick Lamar, but let's kind of look at the historical context a little more. You've weaved it in and out of the conversation, talking about the artists who have received Lifetime Achievement Awards. We've talked about Beyonce. We've talked about Kendrick Lamar. Let's start there. Who are the black artists that have won in the general field at the Grammys?
Certainly. So there are a number of them, and I think that each of them is worth considering in their proper context. The first one, the first album of the year winner was Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder won Album of the Year 3 times in the 1970s.
Yes.
One year when he did not win, Paul Simon, who's a white artist, thanked Stevie Wonder in his victory speech for not having put out an album that year. And so again, in the book project, one of the things that I do is I look at thousands of newspaper articles that were written about Stevie Wonder, which suggested that he, unlike so many of these other artists of the time, was constructed in a way where he could be seen as an individual. He was always going to be racialized, but that he was understood and appreciated by people as an individual in a way that so many of these other artists are not. So when we look at Beyonce and people point to her having a large number of producers on her records, that suggests that, artistry and individuality are linked, and that Beyonce, to many is not an example of this. And so I wrote a piece in the Atlantic magazine called, what does it take for black artists to win Album of the Year? And in just about all of those cases, what you have are artists who are seen as exceptional in some type of way. So, some examples: Michael Jackson, Thriller. I mean, that's a commercial behemoth, but at the same time, a kind of singular person in the midst of all of this. And right now I'm in the midst of trying to think through masculinities in the 1980s as a way of thinking through and understanding him. Most recently, you have Childish Gambino winning Song of the Year and Record of the Year for This Is America a couple of years ago. So again, you have an artist who many people have created discourse around, that he's the thinking rapper, right? That
Yep.
he's the artist who has a television show, and he created this provocative music video that I would argue that his candidacy was seen as more serious than that of other black artists for this reason, that he was recognized, understood, and constructed as somebody who people understood and thought of as an individual in the way that they might not someone like Drake or Kendrick Lamar. And over time, like, if you look at it, there's not too many. We don't have time now to go through all of them, but when you look at each one of them, black artists who have won Album of the Year, I'll give you an example. The most recent one, right? So we haven't had a Black Album of the Year winner since 2008, and the record that won in 2008 was Herbie Hancock, right? Who's a legendary jazz musician, whose most significant works were coming out in the 70s, and the 80s, and probably the 60s as well. And he won for an album of covers of music by Joni Mitchell, the white folk artist. So a black artist playing. So I mean, it was still cover versions are folks' own music, but we haven't had black artists authored compositions win Album of the Year in a decade and a half. And so what it really kind of comes down to is the music industry. And by that, we can attach media, social media, press, music critics. We can think about all of those folks. Have they articulated? Are they understanding an artist as an individual? Mm-hmm. That oftentimes is what it takes. And so again, that goes back to what we've been saying: an individual ... on their terms.
Yes.
Right? So if a black artist is making work that is legible to them, legible to their ideas about what good music and artistry are, then they'll be likely more ready to reward them than they would a black artist who is making work on their own terms.
Absolutely. And thank you. I cut myself off asking the question because I was going to ramble on, but you got to the point. The art has to be exceptional in some way for it to be recognized beyond those racialized categories. So I have two last questions. One, should we care about how the Grammys treats black art? And you don't have to elaborate too much, but we're recording this on the eve of the Oscars, which has their own problems with diversity and recognizing women creators. And two, going back to your conversation about Top Chef, about how the palates of the chefs and the judges have changes, what would that take in the musical world for the voting body of the Recording Academy to expand beyond this idea of one guy with one guitar and one drum set and one bass creating music is inherently superior than Beyonce with a team of creators?
Sure. Well, so one thing that I want to just kind of want to follow up on something that you said. I was teaching the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, so the father of American sociology, posited that the problem of the 20th century would be the color line. He's the one who coins double consciousness, which is a way of articulating the felt and lived experience of black artists. In The Souls of Black Folk, when he's talking about this, he also mentions the strange experience that he has when white people would come up to him and suggest that he was somehow exceptional, that he was somehow different from those other black people. And so I just want to kind of like earmark that in terms of what you were saying about exceptional, right? So that it's exceptional when compared to these myths, these symbols, and these lies that have been perpetuated in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's kind of worth noting. So going back to should we care about these things? I believe very much that we should care about these things, in part because I do care about them and I've dedicated a lot of time to them. And culture is oftentimes best, or understood and constructed, right? So people used to say that, or people still do say very simply, right, that history is told by the winners, and we know the problems of that framing and what it has resulted in and created and happened. But it's worth thinking about that and situating it within this context, right? So, as I said before, I believe that award shows, whenever, here's one way of thinking about it, sadly perhaps, whenever an artist passes away, or if you go on their Wikipedia page now, within the first sentence it'll say is a Grammy Award winning artist or was a Grammy Award winning artist. That the way that we think about culture, awards, credentials, something that James English called the economy of prestige, that is something that is really noteworthy and really, really important for people. Because I think that a lot of times people are looking for guideposts or signposts, and what they oftentimes look to is those who have been awarded. And so I do think that they even, people have been saying the Grammys are irrelevant in perpetuity, basically since their founding. People have been arguing that. They both are and are not, right? They might be out of touch with what the culture, is experiencing and caring about, but that they are also, deeply relevant to how decisions in the music industry get made, the work of which artists will get forwarded and put forward and highlighted and things like that. There's a lot of backroom dealings and, negotiations that are happening in the midst of all of this. And, it sets the tone for what will come after and sets the tone for how we will think about, remember, and understand the greatness of various artists, and then the so-called lack thereof of others. And so I would argue that even if you don't care about them, and the folks who are listening to this, even if we don't necessarily care about them, people do, and that ultimately this type of record keeping, will live on after all of us. And so part of it is about, 50 years from now, hundreds of years from now, that will be a record of what was important in the music industry, and it won't sync up with the lived experience of how things actually were. Mm-hmm. And then with regard to your second point, what do we do about this? So one, the Grammys have been undertaking efforts to increase the diversity, the demographic diversity of their voting body. They've been adding significantly more women, adding significantly more people of color. That's great. I believe that will help. That's a process of reform, right? That when we think about, reforming versus rebuilding, I think that will, that is ultimately going to help and serve. But what is really kind of essential here, is doing this, for Grammy voters, for the industry, for all of us in this moment, to do the type of self-work in terms of what we take for granted about the ways that power is working, about the ways that race is working, right? We're recording this in the midst of, more revelations of police brutality. And what is going to be necessary there is deep cultural work to get at an understanding of the worth and value. So ultimately what we really need to do is to say Black Lives Matter and to assert that, because people of color have been too devalued for far too long by our institutions in all of these types of different ways. And the hope is that when nationally we can do that type of work, we can think about truth, reconciliation, accounting, the work of repair. What will result ultimately, hopefully, in the work of repair is a culture and a community of flourishing, and that a very small way of arguing for ways that we can sort of show that Black Lives Matter, and argue for that, is by saying that Black art is excellent, period. Not on the terms of whiteness, but that Black art, Black food, Black music is excellent, full stop, period. It always already was. And so that this type of reset has to happen where we decenter certain ideas and accept that there are many realities, many ways of viewing, understanding, and experiencing the world. Ultimately, I think that all of them should come to the conclusion that Beyonce Knowles' work, particularly Lemonade, was the most excellent work to appear that year. But that ultimately these are the steps that can be useful for us to take and important for us to take.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much. This started as a conversation about my very good friend Beyonce, but I think it was an incredible exploration of music and culture at large. And I very much appreciate your insights. I know you push back on the idea of neither of us being smarter than the other, but I still think you might have edged me out today.
No, definitely not. I wholeheartedly resist and reject that notion. So I have a PhD, but there are plenty of people who don't have high school educations who have taught me far more about the world than other PhDs have. Again, here we are again, right? There are many, many, many ways of knowing. And if what we do is we focus on the credentializing ways of them, it ignores the structural barriers that make those pathways happen. And so there are so many ways of knowing. There's so many ways of brilliance. There's so many ways. And this is something that, I try and sort of like drop citations for folks. This is something that Black feminist thought in particular has been really, really, really important in terms of thinking about what is knowledge, who has it, what does it look like, and what is recognized as knowledge, and then what is not recognized as knowledge, and how ultimately is that one of the key battlegrounds that when we can really, really get at it, we can realize that that might be where some of the roots of these frictions are. And so, again, I really humbly want to push back in that way that, that I'm just a vessel for the work of artists who have come and that in some ways I'm just grateful that, so many of the things that they do feel fairly self-evident to me, and that I'm able to translate them, put them out in the world this way, hopefully have conversation. I hope I didn't, talk in too much jargon, too much like a scholar or an academic, but that ultimately, we should be thinking about projects of liberation. And this seems like a silly path to that, or an incredibly indirect path to that. But I would just say that, again, excellence is all around us, and Black excellence in particular is, something worth celebrating and acknowledging.
Absolutely. But John, I know you have to run. So again, thank you. I will share all of the details on how to follow John, some of his works, some of the works he cited, so you can do this research and explore on your own, because these are very important conversations that matter a ton to history, to how we experience the current environment. So again, I'll say, John, thank you so much. And that's it. Thanks again to John Vilanova, that's Vilanova with one N, for joining me on That Can't Be Right. Someone hired this man to write some liner notes immediately so I can go in his Grammys entourage. Check out the episode description for all the important works John referenced in our discussion, and then connect with That Can't Be Right on Twitter and Instagram at TCBRpod. And if there's something that you think can't be right, send me an email, thatcan'tberightpodcast@gmail.com. If you're out of new episodes of That Can't Be Right to listen to right now, go to your favorite Beyonce album. Bye.